Have you ever found yourself just staring at a list of verb conjugations and feeling completely defeated?
Oh, I think we all have.
Right. You look at these words and you're trying to force them into your brain through like sheer willpower. And meanwhile, you watch someone else magically absorb the exact same language like a sponge.
Yeah, they hear a word once and they just know it. They don't even seem to be trying.
It feels incredibly unfair.
It really is a universally frustrating experience. You sit there watching that person and naturally start to wonder, do they have a secret?
Exactly. Like, do they study differently? Or do they just have a fundamentally different kind of brain than the rest of us?
Well, that's exactly what we're looking at today.
Yeah. Today's deep dive is all about the hard science of the polyglot brain. We want to find out if those people actually have a genetic superpower or if, the rest of us are just approaching this the wrong way.
We've got a fantastic stack of research covering biology, age, memory, and psychology.
And hey, if you are listening to this right now, you are actively learning English. So we are going to keep the science clear, break down any complex jargon, and really figure out the mechanics of how your brain is actually processing this language.
The overarching theme in the research is understanding what is hardwired into your biology versus what you can actually control.
I honestly look at language learning a lot like a physical workout. Some people are undeniably born with a genetic head start, right?
Oh, definitely. Like
Right.
having naturally long legs for running.
Yeah. Or a specific muscle fiber type that makes lifting heavy weights easier. But having those genetic gifts doesn't mean you just wake up one day and run a marathon.
No, you still have to put in the reps.
Exactly. The goal today is to figure out your own baseline so you know how to train effectively.
Right. And if we start with that baseline, the genetic head start, we have to look closely at the biological blueprint because the research shows that, yes, some brains are physically wired to process language more efficiently right from birth.
Wait, so if someone has this natural wiring, are they just magically fluent without trying? Like, what is the actual physical difference inside their head?
Well, it comes down to a few factors, but a
Right.
major one is the FOXP2 gene. In the scientific community, it's often nicknamed the language gene.
The language gene.
Yeah, but it doesn't give you vocabulary. Variations in this specific gene influence the motor control of your mouth and face, and this is key how efficiently your brain processes syntax.
The syntax being like the order of words in a sentence.
Exactly. But genetics is just the instruction manual, The real magic is in the physical structure the brain builds, specifically something called white matter integrity.
Okay, I've always pictured the brain as gray matter,
Yeah.
the wrinkly outside part where the actual thinking happens.
Yeah.
So what is white matter? Is it like the internal cables connecting the computers?
That's actually a highly accurate way to look at it. The gray matter is the processing center, and the white matter consists of millions of nerve fibers transmitting signals across different regions.
So it's the network.
Right. And a fascinating study in the Journal of Neuroscience looked at a very specific bundle of these cables called the arcuate fasciculus.
That's quite a name.
It is. It's basically the superhighway connecting the frontal lobe where you produce speech and the temporal lobe where you comprehend sounds.
Oh, wow. And what did they find out about this superhighway?
They found that the physical strength and insulation of these specific cables can actually predict how fast someone learns new words.
Insulation, like on a wire.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
In biology, nerve fibers are coated in a fatty substance called myelin. It acts just like the rubber insulation around an electrical wire. The thicker the myelin, the faster the signal travels without leaking energy.
Ah, I see.
So people with higher white matter integrity have exceptionally well-insulated cables in their language centers. The data just moves incredibly fast.
So thicker, more insulated cables mean the information travels faster from the hearing part of the brain to the speaking part?
Right. And it explains some extreme historical cases. Like, consider Emil Krebs. He was a German diplomat from the early 20th century, and he reportedly spoke 68 different languages fluently.
Wait, 68? That goes way beyond a hobby. That's a completely different level of human capability.
It really is. And after he died, scientists actually preserved his brain to see if they could find out why.
Really? Did they find anything?
They did. Decades later, they analyzed it and discovered that Broca's area, that's the specific region in the frontal lobe responsible for speech production, had a completely unique cellular architecture.
You mean it was physically different?
Yes, the neurons were packed and arranged in a way that is significantly different from the average human brain. His physical hardware was quite literally built differently.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. If Emil Krebs had a biologically unique brain, doesn't that prove fluency is just a genetic lottery?
Not necessarily.
Because why should anyone bother putting in hours of study if they don't have this mutant Broca's area or super insulated white matter cables?
Mm.
Am I just doomed to struggle forever?
No, not at all. That's the danger of looking only at the extremes. Biology is just the starting line. It dictates the initial speed of the signal, but it does not dictate your final destination.
So normal brains can still get there.
Absolutely. Millions of people achieve total fluency in a second or third language with completely average normal brain architecture. It just means the route your brain takes to get there might require more conscious effort initially.
Okay, so Krebs had the permanent physical hardware. But what about time? Because if biology is fixed, you still see wildly different results based on age.
Oh, age is a huge factor.
Right. You see immigrant families move to a new country. The parents might study and work for decades, but they keep a heavy accent and struggle with grammar. Meanwhile, their 7-year-old child picks up the language in a few months and sounds like a native speaker.
It's a classic example.
If biology is the main factor, why does the parent's brain fail where the child succeeds?
Well, it's because the physical structure of the brain changes dramatically over time. This brings us to the concept of the critical period and brain plasticity.
Plasticity meaning flexibility.
Exactly. During childhood, the human brain is highly plastic. It's actively building its map of the world, just growing connections wildly.
But obviously we don't keep that flexibility forever.
We don't because it's highly inefficient. The brain consumes a massive amount of energy, and eventually it needs to optimize. And it does this through a mechanism called synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning. I read about this in the notes. Is it basically like a gardener trimming a tree?
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
Because if a tree has hundreds of tiny, weak branches, it can't grow very tall. So the gardener cuts off the smaller, unused branches, which forces all the water and nutrients into the main branches, making them much stronger.
Yes. The brain prunes away neural pathways it isn't using so it can strengthen the ones it relies on every day.
So how does that affect language?
Well, babies are born with the ability to distinguish every single sound or phone in every human language. But by the time you're a toddler, your brain realizes, oh, I'm only hearing English, or I'm only hearing Spanish.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. It prunes away the ability to hear the foreign sounds you don't need, so you can become an absolute expert at your native tongue.
So specializing in our first language physically remove the pathways we would use to easily learn a second one. That totally explains why adults struggle to even hear the difference between certain foreign vowels. The branches are gone.
The branches are gone, and the remaining pathways are heavily reinforced. And researchers have actually pinpointed exactly when this window closes.
Oh, really? When is it?
There was a massive study conducted by MIT, published in the journal Cognition. They used an enormous data set of 670,000 participants.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, and they found that the ability to learn a new language with true native-level grammatical proficiency peaks at age 17.4.
Wait, why 17.4? That is such a specific number.
It corresponds to the final major wave of brain maturation. The prefrontal cortex finishes its major development, and the overall plasticity of the brain settles into its adult form.
The cement finally dries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
After 17.4, the ability to effortlessly absorb native-level grammar begins a steady decline.
Okay, but since almost everyone listening to this right now is well past 17.4 and our cement is dry, how are we actually processing English right now?
That's the big question.
Right, because we can't use childhood plasticity and we can't change our genetics. So what is the actual mental tool we are relying on as adults?
Well, this is where we shift from physical brain traits to active cognitive processes, because adult language learning is essentially a massive, conscious data processing task.
Okay.
And the primary tool your brain uses for this is your working memory.
Working memory. So we aren't talking about long-term memory, like where you store your childhood memories or facts for a test. We're talking about the short-term workspace inside your head.
Yes. Working memory is how much active information you can juggle in your mind at one exact moment. And within that workspace, there is a specific component called the phonological loop.
The phonological loop.
Yeah, it deals entirely with auditory information, the raw sounds you're hearing in real time.
So if I'm trying to picture the phonological loop, is it basically like a short-term audio recorder inside my head?
That's a great way to think of it.
Like when someone speaks to me in a new language, my brain hits record. And if I have a highly efficient loop, I can hold on to a longer string of sounds and let the recording play back in my head for a few extra seconds before it disappears.
That playback mechanism is the key to everything. The longer the raw audio loops in your working memory, the more time the analytical part of your brain has to decode it.
So it's not just about memorizing a sound.
No, high working memory is the mechanism that allows you to subconsciously spot patterns.
How does that work in practice? Like spotting a grammar pattern.
Exactly. Imagine you hear a new verb in 3 different sentences. If your phonological loop holds onto those sentences long enough, your brain starts to notice, wait, every time they talk about the past, there is an ED sound at the end of the word.
Oh, I get it. You start to internalize the grammar naturally, like a detective reviewing an audio tape, rather than having to consciously memorize a rule from a textbook.
Yes, that is the ultimate goal, just naturally feeling what is correct because your brain has processed the pattern.
But here's a major variable. What if your working memory is great, your genetics are completely fine, but you sit down to practice and you still just freeze up? Like you learn nothing.
Now we're talking about the affective filter.
The affective filter.
Yes. This concept was introduced by Dr. Stephen Krashen, a linguist from the University of Southern California. And honestly, understanding the affective filter hypothesis is arguably the single most important thing for an adult learner.
Okay, let's break down the jargon for the listeners.
Yeah.
Affective sounds very academic, but it really just means emotional, right?
Yes, exactly.
So Krashen is saying that your emotional state creates a literal filter in your brain.
It's not just a metaphor. It is a biological mechanism. When you feel anxious about your accent or stressed about making a mistake in public, or even if you're just terribly bored by the material, your brain enters a low-level stress state.
Wait, so Krashen is saying that my anxiety about speaking to a native speaker or my boredom with a grammar textbook is literally physically blocking the language from entering my memory.
Yes. Your brain is essentially a survival machine. When you feel stress, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, hijacks your cognitive resources.
Oh, wow.
The brain prioritizes survival over learning. So the phonological loop we just talked about, it gets shut down.
Yeah.
The new vocabulary simply bounces off the wall and never reaches the language processing centers in the cortex.
This perfectly explains a phenomenon you see in language classes all the time. Extroverts almost always seem to learn faster at the very beginning of their journey.
You absolutely do.
And it's not that they have better memories, it's that their filter is lower.
Exactly, because extroverts generally experience less social anxiety. They are more willing to make mistakes in public. They will try to speak, use entirely the wrong verb tense, and not feel a paralyzing sense of shame.
Right.
And by staying relaxed, their working memory stays wide open. Plus, that constant output speaking out loud forces the person they are talking with to provide immediate feedback, which rapidly accelerates the learning loop.
This reminds me so much of Benny Lewis.
Oh, the Fluent in 3 months guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you just look at his results today, you might assume he has the Emil Krebs brain.
Yeah.
But Benny actually failed learning the Irish language in school for 11 straight years. He was absolutely not a natural genius.
He is a textbook case study for the power of the affective filter. His early failures weren't due to a lack of intelligence. They were due to the traditional high-stress, perfection-focused school environment.
Completely. And his ultimate success later in life came from a philosophy he calls speak from day one. He completely embraces the embarrassment of being wrong.
Which is so hard to do.
It is. But he accepts that he's going to sound silly, he's going to make ridiculous mistakes, and he actively refuses to let it cause him anxiety. By intentionally removing the stress, he takes down the biological wall, and the language is allowed to flow straight into his working memory.
The implication of that is massive. It means that a huge portion of your learning speed is entirely within your control. It's about actively managing your own psychology, calming your amygdala, and creating an internal environment where your brain feels safe enough to learn.
So let's play this out. Let's say you manage your psychology, you lower your affective filter, you push through the awkwardness, and you successfully learn a second language.
Okay.
If Benny pushed through and lowered his filter, does his brain change?
Yeah.
Like, if you decide to learn a third language, is the process harder or easier than the first time?
Oh, it gets significantly easier. Linguists call this the snowball effect, looking specifically at language transfer and third language acquisition. The fundamental rule is, well, the more you know, the easier it gets.
Why is that? Are we suddenly growing thicker white matter cables just by practicing?
It's less about changing the physical cables and more about leveraging the software you have already installed. The most obvious way is through cognates and structural similarities.
Like shared words.
Right. If a native Spanish speaker decides to learn Italian, they are absolutely not starting from zero. The languages share a common Latin ancestor, meaning Thousands of words sound almost identical, and the grammatical frameworks match. They are practically starting at 80% proficiency.
But what if the languages share absolutely nothing? What if an English speaker learns Japanese and then decides to tackle Russian? There are no shared words or cognates to lean on.
That brings us to metalinguistic awareness. This is a fantastic cognitive milestone. By going through the struggle of learning a second language, your brain has essentially learned how to learn a language.
What does that mean in practice? How to learn?
You become aware of abstract grammatical concepts that don't exist in your native tongue. If you only speak English, the idea that a table is a feminine word and a chair is a masculine word seems utterly illogical.
Right, it doesn't compute at all.
But once you fight through learning Spanish and finally grasp the concept of gendered nouns, your brain creates a mental file folder for that idea.
Ah, I see.
So years later, when you learn Russian and encounter gendered nouns again, your brain doesn't trigger a stress response. It says, oh, I know how this mechanism works, and simply sorts the new vocabulary into the existing folder.
You know, if I'm thinking about metalinguistic awareness, the best analogy I can come up with is learning to drive a manual transmission car.
Okay, I like that.
If you've only ever driven an automatic, getting into a stick-shift car for the first time is terrifying. You're trying to balance the clutch pedal, the gas, the steering wheel, and the gear shifter all at once. The car stalls, you panic, your affective filter goes way up.
The cognitive load is entirely overwhelming.
Right. But once you finally understand the friction point, and your brain builds the physical coordination to operate a clutch, the mystery is completely gone.
Exactly.
If you then jump into a totally different brand of manual car, say, moving from a Honda to a Porsche, it might feel a little stiff or strange for the first 2 minutes, but you know the underlying mechanics. You don't have to relearn what a clutch is, you just drive away.
Yeah.
That is metalinguistic awareness.
It's the perfect comparison.
Right.
You are no longer learning how to drive, you're just learning the specific quirks of a new vehicle.
Let's bring all this science together because we've covered everything from genetics to psychology today.
Yeah.
If we map out the research, it really falls into two distinct categories, right? Things you cannot change and things you absolutely have the power to control.
Exactly. Brain anatomy, like your FOXP2 gene variations and your natural white matter integrity, is fixed. Age, and that 17.4-year threshold for peak childhood plasticity, is also fixed.
And working memory.
Working memory, like the size of your phonological loop, can be optimized a bit, but largely your biological hardware is what it is.
But, and this is the core message if you're listening to this right now, your prior language experience and your affective filter are entirely in your control.
Absolutely.
As a B1 or B2 English learner, you have already proven that your brain can acquire language. You've already built some of that metalinguistic awareness. The clutch is already installed.
You have survived the hardest part, which is building the initial framework.
Biology certainly matters.
Mm.
We aren't going to deny the science. But your mindset is the ultimate key to unlocking whatever biological potential you have. You do not need the brain of Emil Krebs to become fluent in English.
No, you don't.
You don't need to be under the age of 17, and you don't need magic genes. What you need is to manage your amygdala. Lower your stress. Relax. Be willing to sound a little silly sometimes, just like Vinnie Lewis did when he finally learned Irish after failing for 11 years. The only thing truly standing in your way is that invisible wall of anxiety.
And if we look at the bigger picture, it leads to a truly fascinating final thought. We know that the struggle of learning a second language builds metalinguistic awareness. Right.
So consider this. What if the frustration you are feeling right now, wrestling with English grammar and forcing your brain to process new sounds? What if that very struggle is permanently strengthening your cognitive pathways?
Oh, wow.
By pushing through the difficulty today, lowering your filter, and doing the hard work, you might be slowly molding your own brain to be a little more like Emil Krebs every single day.
Now, that is a thought worth holding on to next time you open your textbook. Keep putting in the reps.